Oh, when buck breaking goes wrong. Talk about outsmarting yourself. Adidas decided to cut its deal with Kanye West, you'll recall. The white media was going into orgasms about that one, this black man having lost something on the order of $1 billion worth of value in a single day. Well, as it turns out, Kanye wasn't the only one who lost $1 billion. Adidas has had to reluctantly report that their having dropped Kanye West is going to cost the company an estimated $1.3 billion in sales. Adidas, in a company report, said that they can't repurpose any of the remaining Kanye West apparel and shoe stock, and that being the case, they're staring down the barrel of at least $500 million in lost profits this year alone. By repurpose, that means to remove Kanye's name and branding from the apparel and shoes, and to sell them under Adidas's own name. Adidas is not doing the best right now when it comes to their finances. They can't afford this kind of hit to their bottom line. Kanye was one of their best sellers, truth be told, one of the few things that was moving merchandise for them. So that begs the question, why would a shoe company, whose finances are already precarious to begin with, decide to shoot themselves in both feet? Largely because they were trying to be heroes to the wrong people, like the white media. Now, most of the reason that this tempest in a teapot about Kanye West even happened was because Ari Emmanuel, the mentally unstable media mogul, whose main talent seems to be throwing crap from behind a veil of anonymity, decided to lead a phony crusade to push the lie of black anti-Semitism. And that particular trope is something of a guilty pleasure for certain folks. The lies came fast and heavy on that one. Now, of course, it's totally ridiculous that Kanye West would harm anyone or even cause anyone to be harmed, but the talking point from the white media and their bootlicks was that even though Kanye West was harmless, it was young black men who were the threat. Young black men who listen to him. Hell, even if they don't listen to Kanye West, if they're a young black male, that makes them a threat. Because if Kanye West says something stupid, then every black male becomes a threat. Because they just don't know any better. They just can't control themselves because of, well, something. And we see this over and over again from certain quarters. The lie that young black people are a threat just because. Now, when you look at who shoots up synagogues and who carries out anti-Semitic violence, it's not young black anything. So what is this really about? When the issue of Kanye's Twitter tweets came up, Ari Emmanuel was mega triggered, but he showed that his true target wasn't Kanye West at all. It was black people. This guy has a real chip on his shoulder when it comes to black folks, and that certifies his mental instability. Though it comes as no surprise that Ari Emmanuel's other great skill these days seems to be hiding, especially since his friend and business partner Dana White was caught on video beating his wife. Ari Emmanuel's been laying real low after that one. No interviews, no press releases, not even a postcard. The California State Legislative Women's Caucus challenged him to step forward and to denounce his buddy Dana. But he hasn't said anything. Hasn't been seen either. Now, what needs to be remembered is that Ari Emmanuel, in addition to being the head of Endeavor, is or was one of the most feared talent agents in America. I don't know what he did other than scream and yell at people to earn that reputation, but somehow this twerp created some sort of myth about himself of being some sort of guy to be feared in the entertainment business. But now, the man whose Twitter fingers ran wild for weeks on end, mostly against black men, all of a sudden forgot where he put his keyboard? Well, it seems we figured out how to shut up the biggest mouth in media after all. And with Adidas now taking on water, there's other questions for Ari. My financial advice for Adidas would be a question and a statement. The question, did you bother to even think about who would buy your shoes or your apparel after you dumped Kanye? Because when you dump him, you also dump his audience too. You dump the people who follow his silly antics, because a lot of the stuff that he does is nothing more than attention whoring. He wants people talking about him because his brand is attention. There were 100 different ways that Adidas could have handled that situation, but they chose the one that would leave them holding the bag. And for what? Or rather, for who? Well, that brings us to the statement. Since Ari Emmanuel was the one with the big mouth who had this brilliant idea to dump Kanye, Adidas ought to ask Ari Emmanuel to buy their shoes and their apparel. I would think that he has an obligation to do so, but of course for a creep like him, obligation only goes in one direction. But this is just one more thing that the white media should be confronting him about. But as I've already covered in other videos on this very channel, the white media already declared that nobody cares about Ari Emmanuel, which of course is white media code for they don't care about him because he echoes their racial narrative. But it's obvious that a lot of people are very interested in Ari Emmanuel, though not for anything good. Ari Emmanuel also was stirring the pot and fanning the flames of phony outrage against Kyrie Irving as part of his effort to try to manufacture the false impression that there's some pattern of black people who are anti-Semitic. But unlike Adidas, the NBA has black men who are the NBA Players Union, and they spoke up for Kyrie. Also, the NBA is not suicidal, though that doesn't change the fact that some of the NBA team owners chose to commit financial hara-kiri on themselves, like the racist franchise owner of the Brooklyn Nets, Joe Tsai. He wanted to get a pat on the back from the likes of Ari Emmanuel, so he decided to publicly attack one of his star players and call himself trying to buck break this man. Let's see if we can make him grovel publicly, just for our own sick amusement. Well, in the end, Kyrie Irving left and Kevin Durant went with him, and the Nets lost a ton of value for their franchise. A lot of their economic value evaporated overnight, and nobody is interested in going to play for Joe Tsai. So, will Ari Emmanuel steer any top-tier talent to the Nets? Does he even have that ability? As I recall, Endeavor represents a number of NBA players, but Ari's left Joe Tsai swinging in the wind. See, what Adidas is finding out is the same thing Joe Tsai found out, that playing the fool for anti-black racists is not a victimless crime. You'll feel very clever with yourself at first because you think you're getting away with abusing black people. But reality always has the last word. And when that day comes, Ari Emmanuel won't be around to bail you out because he can't. Ari Emmanuel likes to egg people on to destroy themselves. But when their butts are in a crack, Ari Emmanuel will be long gone, and as we've seen, he won't be answering his phone. Let's be clear, Ari Emmanuel is an anti-black racist, no different and no better than his brother Rahm Emanuel, who covered up the murder of Laquan McDonald. Ari Emmanuel's dilemma is that he wants to have it both ways. He wants to maintain a foot on the side of being a religious minority, but he also wants to make it clear that he's only a religious minority, certainly not an ethnic one. So, like everyone else who wanted to get in good with the white power structure, Ari Emmanuel knows the fastest route to prove that you're on the team is to attack black people. Do it openly, do it egregiously. And Ari Emmanuel is not the only one who likes to play this game. We see other people, from Dinesh D'Souza to Juju Chang, with their lies about black people attacking all Asians in America, to Ari Emmanuel and his gibberish. White power learned a long time ago to use buffer groups to push the white supremacist line, to give it cover, but also a thin veneer of at least rhetorical legitimacy. Even if it only lasts as long as it takes for you to challenge it, the point is they get to hide behind something. And part of this scripted societal narrative is to use buffer groups to claim that black people are the real racists, or at the very least, black people are no less racist or bigoted than the white supremacists. That's the point they have to reach, to try to build some sort of phony equivalence between black people and the very white supremacists who attack and oppress us. And then there's the predictable orgy of attacks and condemnations that gets hurled at us afterwards. And although everyone knows it's a complete lie, everyone also knows that attacking black people is the national pastime. It's a sick, guilty pleasure, and there's a lot of people who enjoy partaking in it because it reinforces the racial hierarchy that so many people in this country depend on. It reassures them who the society's designated bottom is. But Ari Emmanuel's lies accusing black people of anti-Semitism also have other damaging effects. Last week, the usual suspects, these white supremacists, were online saying that they were planning a day of hate on last Saturday that was supposed to be aimed at Jewish targets. Now, there were a lot of people from the Jewish community and political figures who tried to counter this by saying that they would like for people in the public, the non-Jewish community, to go to a synagogue to show support for the Jewish community. First of all, considering the Tree of Life mass killing that happened, I personally don't think that inviting strangers to drop in unannounced at the local synagogue is such a good idea, though I do recall seeing that the governor of New York visited a synagogue. But there were a lot of figures from the Jewish community advocating that non-Jews should make it a point to get closer to the Jewish community in terms of visiting a synagogue or saying hello to a Jewish family in the area. I can understand that sentiment. especially considering that the Jewish community does not have and has never had a better ally than the black community. This is why lies from Ari Emmanuel are so destructive. There are threats to the Jewish community. There is anti-Semitism out there, but it's not coming from the black community. Quite the opposite. When something happens to the Jewish community, black folks go out of their way to show support and solidarity. So when Ari Emmanuel decided to externalize his own anti-black racism, he created a false air of hostility. But his lie becomes reality in that when you have one of the most influential figures in media, who only has to snap his finger, and you'll have huge white media platforms doing everything they can to copy and paste his lies that black people are somehow the core of anti-Semitism in America, that makes it where instead of watching the white supremacist, people are instead suspicious of black people, who are not a threat at all. Ari Emmanuel and other anti-black racists want to make it where black people are seen with suspicion and hostility. And while he may think himself so smart at making black people a target for a few days, when the real anti-Semites, these white supremacists, announce their latest act of open bigotry, Ari Emmanuel and his fellow travelers have made it harder to build that solidarity, not easier. There's more than a few people in the Jewish community who see through the kinds of lies that Ari Emmanuel tells, and they understand that the steady drumbeat of anti-black bigotry he tried to manufacture creates an opening for actual anti-Semites and makes it where people who have actually stood with the Jewish community get carpet-bombed with headlines and white media stories saying that we're the problem, and this allows the white supremacists to operate with impunity. Ari Emmanuel has distracted the attention of the country and the attention of the Jewish community at a time when they needed to be focused on the real threat. And while I'm sure there's plenty of people in the Jewish community who see through Ari Emmanuel's lies, merely seeing through them is not enough. Ari Emmanuel has to be opposed when he gets out here doing all this race baiting. It is a danger in more ways than one, and not just to the black community. Black people were not the ones who were announcing a national day of hate. For that matter, it wasn't Kanye West or Kyrie Irving either. Nobody in the black community has ever called for such a thing. But these white supremacists do so routinely. When white supremacists are trying to carry out some attack, what's called for is a united front. But how can that happen when you have one of the most powerful figures in media and business keeping a foot in the white supremacist camp? Now, fortunately, nothing happened this weekend, but what needs to be remembered is that even if these white supremacists had tried something, Ari Emmanuel would have been just fine. He has multiple homes, and he stays on the move a lot domestically and internationally. If a synagogue were to become the target of some white supremacist attack, Ari Emmanuel wouldn't have been there. No one has seen nor heard from him since his pal Dana White got caught beating his wife. Even in the face of this threatened day of hate, Ari Emmanuel was staying incommunicado. So not only was he not there for Adidas or Josiah, he wasn't even there for the very community that he claimed to be so concerned about. Ari Emmanuel is addicted to his own myth of being feared and powerful. He's not happy unless he's attacking someone, or unless he can feel like he's made some people cower in front of him or grovel before him. The white media spent so many years propping up this lie that Ari Emmanuel is such a holy terror and that everybody's just terrified of him, that Emmanuel has taken it to be part of his identity now. And as he sees it, he doesn't feel right unless he's destroying someone. That's something to keep in mind the next time Ari Emmanuel or anyone else decides that it's time to gin up the old black anti-Semitism trope. Anti-black racism is the cheapest of ideas. But if you make the mistake of falling for it, it can cost you a lot. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Reginald Caldwell, Frederica Moore, Sherman Marshall, and Coco Sweets. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.